The rain hammered relentlessly against Officer Smith's cruiser as he made the turn onto Lincoln Street. The wipers swiped the windshield in a steady rhythm, but the sound of the storm barely masked the tension crawling up his spine. His radio crackled, Unit 12 911 call, welfare check at 4 billion. Neighbor reports no response. Smith's hand tightened on the wheel. He had been on hundreds of calls like this, but something in the voice of the dispatcher, clipped and urgent, made his stomach twist. He parked under the dim glow of the street lamp and grabbed his flashlight and radio. The numbers 4 billion gleamed on the brass plaque, rain streaking down the wall. Approaching the door, Smith tried the knob. It was locked from the inside. No knocks, no voices, no movement. Only a faint scent lingered, coffee, warm and inviting, as though life had just been there a moment ago. He radioed the dispatcher. "I need backup and forensics. Possible welfare check." "No forced entry." The dispatcher's voice came back, anxious. "Copy that. Units en route." Smith crouched to look through the mail slot, but the dim light offered little clarity. He could make out 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table, one empty and cold, the other still steaming. And there she was, a young woman, early 20s, seated in a chair at the table, hands folded neatly in her lap, posture rigid yet calm. Her face was serene but lifeless. A wave of unease swept over Smith. The scene was too clean, too precise. No signs of struggle, nothing out of place except the eerie stillness of the victim. The warm cup of coffee suggested she had been alive very recently, but everything else screamed meticulous control. Whoever had done this understood her habits, and the apartment. Smith's radio buzzed again. "Unit 12, backup is 5 minutes out." He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "This isn't random. Someone planned this." Minutes later, the scene transformed. Forensic lights illuminated the small apartment, cameras clicked, and investigators moved with deliberate precision. Each object was photographed, every position documented. The neat alignment of furniture, the subtle placement of the coffee cups, even the small indentation of a notebook on the table, all hinted at a mind calculating every detail, leaving only the illusion of ordinariness. Smith stepped back, letting the team work, but the image of the young woman lingered in his mind. 2 cups of coffee, a locked apartment, a carefully staged scene, and somewhere, hidden in plain sight, the truth waited to be uncovered. Detective Martinez ducked under the yellow police tape, stepping cautiously into the apartment. The faint scent of coffee still lingered in the air, sharp against the sterile smell of cleaning agents and antiseptic from forensic wipes. Every corner of the small apartment was photographed, every object meticulously documented, but no matter how much he observed, the scene was deceptively calm. Emily Johnson sat upright at the kitchen table, early 20s, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her expression unnervingly serene. Her eyes were closed, yet the stillness of her body suggested an unnatural pause in time. Martinez scanned the room. No overturned chairs, no signs of struggle, no broken locks. Every window was closed and secured. The apartment appeared untouched, ordinary, too ordinary for a crime scene. On the table, 2 coffee cups caught his attention. One was cold, abandoned as if it had been sitting there for hours. The other still emitted a thin wisp of steam, evidence of its recent use. Martinez crouched, careful not to disturb the scene, and noted the alignment of the objects. The notebook on the table had faint indentations from prior writing. A pen rested just beside it. Everything seemed deliberately placed. Forensic teams began their work. Fingerprints were dusted, swabs taken, and every angle photographed. Surprisingly, no unidentified prints were found on the coffee cups, suggesting gloves were used or someone handled objects very carefully. The apartment itself was a puzzle, designed to mislead. Whoever had done this understood timing, routine, and perception, how to stage death without leaving a single outward clue. Martinez scribbled notes in his pad, no forced entry, no defensive wounds. Coffee cup warm, time of death within 30 minutes, scene staged, killer familiar with victim's habits. Neighbors were interviewed immediately. One recalled seeing a hooded figure leave the hallway late at night. Another mentioned Emily had seemed distracted earlier in the evening, absorbed in her phone, perhaps expecting someone. Each small detail hinted at a visitor, a person Emily trusted. Martinez's mind raced as he considered the psychological profile emerging from the scene. The killer was patient, calculated, and skilled at manipulation. The apartment wasn't just a location, it was part of the weapon, carefully arranged to control perception. Even the simplest detail, the placement of a coffee cup, became evidence of premeditation. By nightfall, the apartment was empty of neighbors, but Martinez remained, staring at the table where Emily had died. 2 cups of coffee, a locked apartment, a crime committed with subtlety, patience, and chilling precision. It was a crime that demanded more than forensic analysis. It demanded an understanding of human behavior, timing, and the psychological control required to orchestrate death in such a deliberate way. Detective Martinez stepped into the apartment again the next morning, the glow of forensic lights casting long shadows across the walls. Each photograph, each fingerprint, each coffee stain told a story, but it was a story written in subtlety. There was no forced entry, no struggle, no chaos, just a carefully orchestrated scene designed to mislead. The first thing Martinez noticed was the warm coffee cup. It had been placed precisely where Emily would naturally reach for it. The temperature indicated she had consumed the beverage minutes before her death. The other cup, cold, suggested routine, normalcy, but in reality it was part of the manipulation. The killer had relied on her habits to execute the crime flawlessly. Martinez's team dusted for prints, swabbed surfaces, and examined the notebook and pen on the table. Surprisingly, no unknown fingerprints appeared on the cups. Whoever had handled them had been deliberate, careful, perhaps wearing gloves. The apartment itself had become a tool of deception. Interviews began immediately. The neighbor across the hall reported seeing a hooded figure leave the hallway late at night. "I didn't get a good look," she said, voice trembling. "It was quick, like they knew exactly where they were going." Another neighbor mentioned hearing nothing unusual, but she recalled Emily texting someone repeatedly that evening. Martinez made a note. Timing and routine were critical. The roommate admitted to an argument earlier in the day. "Nothing serious," he insisted, but his gaze flickered and he avoided eye contact. Martinez observed micro-expressions, tiny muscle twitches, subtle jaw tension, shifts in posture. Each small movement spoke volumes about stress, deception, or concealment of guilt. Even the boyfriend, calm and composed, displayed signs of cognitive dissonance. He answered questions smoothly, yet his hands trembled slightly, and his eyes flicked toward the one-way mirror repeatedly. Martinez noted every subtle cue, knowing that behavior often revealed more than words. The investigators began constructing a psychological profile. The killer had to be familiar with Emily's routines, patient, meticulous, and capable of maintaining calm under scrutiny. Every object in the apartment, every coffee cup, every locked door was part of a controlled environment, intended to manipulate perception and mislead first responders. By the end of the day, Martinez stood over the table, observing the scene as if trying to see through the eyes of the perpetrator. 2 cups of coffee, a locked apartment, not a struggle but a meticulously staged tableau of death. The physical evidence was precise, but the human element, the behavior, the timing, the psychological fingerprints, was the key to solving the case. Detective Martinez and his partner, Detective Lopez, began the series of interviews that would slowly unravel the web surrounding Emily's death. They knew that in a case as meticulous as this, the truth often lay not just in what people said, but in how they said it. The first interview was with the boyfriend. Sitting in the stark gray room, he maintained a calm exterior, but subtle signs betrayed his composure. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, eyes darting briefly toward the one-way mirror before returning to Martinez. "I was at home all evening," he said steadily. "I didn't see anyone. I didn't leave my apartment." His voice was smooth, practiced, but Martinez noticed the hesitation before the word anyone, the slight lift of his eyebrows, the tightening of his jaw. Micro-expressions and small body movements often spoke louder than words. Next came the roommate, a young man who seemed nervous from the outset. He described leaving the apartment earlier that day and returning to find everything locked and calm. "Nothing serious happened," he repeated several times, almost compulsively. Yet Martinez noted his shifting gaze, the tapping of his foot, and the way he swallowed before answering certain questions. He was anxious, defensive, and aware of the investigator's scrutiny. Neighbors were also questioned. One reported seeing a hooded figure moving down the hallway around the estimated time of death, but couldn't provide clear details. Another recalled Emily texting persistently that evening, appearing focused and unaware of her surroundings. Even these minor observations became critical when cross-referenced with forensic evidence. Martinez began mentally assembling the psychological profile. The killer had intimate knowledge of Emily's habits and routines, was patient, and knew how to stage a scene for maximum deception. The lack of forced entry, the careful placement of coffee cups, and the tidy arrangement of the apartment suggested someone meticulous and highly organized. The detectives compared statements with physical evidence. Minor contradictions appeared, slight mismatches in timelines, hesitations when describing movements, and avoidance of direct eye contact. Each discrepancy provided insight into possible deception or incomplete knowledge. By the end of the day, Martinez realized the interviews had done more than gather information. They had revealed patterns. Stress, hesitation, and subtle microexpressions began to point toward someone who could orchestrate such a precise, controlled crime. The psychological breadcrumbs left by the killer were becoming clear: manipulation, premeditation, and an understanding of human perception. The apartment was more than a scene of death, it was a stage. And the investigators were learning to read the actor's cues. The lab smelled of antiseptic and chemicals, a sterile environment that contrasted sharply with the emotional weight of the case. Detective Martinez and the forensic team gathered around monitors displaying photographs of the apartment, fingerprints, and the two coffee cups. Every detail was analyzed, every anomaly noted. Dr. Lillian Carter, the medical examiner, began her report. Cause of death: acute poisoning, toxin administered orally, no external injuries. No defensive wounds. She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle. Time of death corresponds with the warm coffee cup. Based on temperature readings, she likely ingested the poison within 30 minutes before being found. Martinez felt the weight of premeditation settle over the team. The locked apartment, untouched windows, and precise placement of objects suggested deliberate control. The killer had not only planned the act but had orchestrated the environment to mislead anyone investigating. The fingerprint team reported no unidentified prints on the coffee cups beyond the victims. Smudged prints on the table may indicate gloves were used or careful handling. No forced entry anywhere. Martinez scribbled in his notebook: high-functioning perpetrator, calm under pressure, knows victims' routines, likely close to her. Every forensic detail reinforced a psychological profile. Someone meticulous, patient, and capable of manipulating both the scene and the perceptions of investigators. Dr. Carter added another crucial observation. The victim's phone shows a series of texts to an unknown contact. The last message was sent an hour before death. Whoever arrived after that executed the crime efficiently and left no trace. Martinez examined the scene photographs again. The two coffee cups, a simple object in daily life, had become instruments of control and deception. The warm cup dictated timing, the neatness suggested premeditation, and the locked apartment created an illusion of impossibility. The killer had relied on intimate knowledge of the victim's habits and psychological expectations. As the forensic team finalized their report, Martinez reflected. This wasn't a crime of passion or spontaneity. It was calculated, deliberate, and psychologically sophisticated. The murderer had manipulated perception, exploiting trust and routine, turning ordinary objects into deadly tools. Even small details revealed much about the killer's mindset. The gloves or careful handling implied meticulousness, patience, and premeditation. The locked apartment was classic misdirection, a way to make the crime appear unsolvable. The coffee cup, warm and inviting, had been the delivery method for death. Martinez realized that while physical evidence was essential, understanding human behavior, timing, habits, and subtle psychological control was the key to unraveling this crime. The apartment was more than a scene. It was a psychological map of the killer's mind, waiting to be decoded. Detective Martinez sat across from Emily's boyfriend in the stark, gray interrogation room. Every detail of the space seemed designed to amplify tension. The harsh fluorescent lights, the emptiness, the faint hum of the ventilation system. The young man maintained a calm exterior, but Martinez noticed subtle cues. His hands fidgeted slightly, fingers twisting together, and his foot tapped nervously against the floor. Micro-expressions, subtle gestures, and vocal inflections would speak louder than words. "Where were you between 6 and 9 last night?" Martinez asked steadily. "Can anyone verify that?" I was at home." "Alone?" the boyfriend replied, his voice smooth but slightly rushed. "No one came over. I didn't leave. I swear." His eyes flicked toward the one-way mirror, then back, betraying a tension he tried to hide. Next came the roommate. Calm on the surface, he recounted leaving the apartment earlier in the day. "I locked the door behind me. I didn't see or hear anything unusual." Yet his jaw tightened, and his gaze avoided direct eye contact, subtle signs Martinez recognized as defensive behavior. Both suspects were seemingly consistent, but small contradictions and stress indicators hinted at incomplete truths. Martinez and Lopez cross-checked these alibis against forensic evidence. The warm coffee cup indicated Emily's death occurred shortly before discovery. Phone records showed texts to an unknown number right before her death. Neighbor accounts described a hooded figure moving through the hallway late at night. Each piece of information began to form a timeline, but it also highlighted discrepancies in the suspect's statements. The detectives focused on behavioral analysis, the boyfriend's overly rehearsed responses, the roommate's nervous repetitions, and the subtle physiological cues, shifts in posture, blinking patterns, foot tapping, revealed stress inconsistent with mere anxiety. Martinez noted, these were the hallmarks of cognitive dissonance, where the mind struggles to maintain a lie under scrutiny. Finally, Martinez summarized the findings to the team. The alibis were superficially airtight, but psychology suggested cracks. Someone close to Emily, familiar with her routines and capable of careful planning, had orchestrated the crime. The absence of forced entry, combined with the careful staging and the warm coffee cup, suggested premeditation and control. The apartment had been transformed into a psychological trap. Each suspect's body language, verbal patterns, and subtle hesitations were now evidence in themselves. The detectives knew that breaking the illusion of normalcy, exposing inconsistencies, and reading the hidden stress beneath calm exteriors would be essential to solving the case. By the end of the day, the investigation had moved beyond physical evidence. The real breakthrough would come from understanding human behavior, timing, and manipulation, the silent language the killer had left behind. Detective Martinez sat back in his chair, staring at the phone records spread across the table. One detail had stood out from the beginning, but only now did its significance hit him. Emily's last text wasn't to her boyfriend nor to her roommate, it was to an unknown number. The message was brief, almost casual. "Coffee's ready. See you soon." A chill ran down Martinez's spine. Someone else had been expected that night, someone Emily trusted. The warm cup of coffee on the table was no accident. It was the delivery method for the poison. The killer had manipulated the scene, staging every detail, the locked doors, the tidy apartment, the 2 coffee cups, to create an illusion of normalcy and impossibility. Then a neighbor recalled a small detail that had initially seemed trivial. The building's security camera had caught a figure leaving the hallway late at night. The hooded figure moved confidently, with a deliberate gait that suggested familiarity with the apartment layout. Martinez replayed the footage repeatedly, noting the controlled, unhurried movements. This was no opportunistic crime. This was careful, premeditated, and executed with precision. The forensic team confirmed the final piece. Trace residue on the warm coffee cup contained a rare compound. It could only have been added moments before consumption. The timeline matched the cryptic text, proving the killer had coordinated the visit and acted swiftly. Martinez began assembling the psychological profile. The perpetrator was organized, patient, and capable of exploiting trust. They understood Emily's habits intimately and had used her routine against her. Confidence and meticulous control were the hallmarks of the individual who orchestrated the scene. He convened the team. This isn't a crime of chance. This is someone who planned every detail to manipulate perception. The warm coffee, the locked doors, the absence of struggle, everything was designed to control what we would see and believe. The killer left no traces except the smallest psychological breadcrumbs. The detectives realized the implications. The unknown contact opened the terrifying possibility that the killer had been someone Emily knew and trusted implicitly. By exploiting her routine, they created a flawless trap. Martinez's eyes returned to the photographs of the apartment, the 2 cups of coffee, the tidy table, the locked doors. It was not just a crime scene. It was a psychological chessboard. The killer had anticipated every move, every assumption, and every expectation. Outside, rain began again, tapping against the windows. Inside, the investigators understood the truth. The crime was not just about the physical act. It was about control, manipulation, and the subtle power of psychological dominance. And the person behind it was closer than anyone had imagined. The interrogation room was silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. Detective Martinez and his partner, Detective Lopez, sat across from the suspect, a young man in his mid-20s, outwardly calm but with subtle signs of tension betraying him. His hands were clasped tightly, fingers twisting as if holding on to a fragile composure. His foot tapped lightly, almost imperceptibly, a nervous rhythm beneath the surface. "Let's start simple," Martinez said in a calm, steady voice. "We know Emily sent a text not long before she died. Can you explain who she was expecting?" The suspect hesitated. His eyes darted away, briefly glancing at the one-way mirror. I don't know. She didn't tell me." His voice was measured, but the micro-tremor betrayed stress. Lopez slid a coffee cup across the table, a subtle psychological tactic. "We found traces of poison in this exact cup," she said neutrally. "It matches the timeline. Whoever prepared it knew her routines. Can you explain how someone could plan that?" The suspect's shoulders stiffened. His breathing became shallow, and he pressed his lips together, trying to regain control. I wasn't there. I didn't." He stopped mid-sentence, his carefully rehearsed facade beginning to crack. Martinez leaned forward slightly, voice calm but authoritative. "You know, people often claim innocence, even when their actions say otherwise. Stress, hesitation, and body language rarely lie. Right now, your body is telling the story your words are not." The detectives introduced subtle contradictions in his account, carefully framing them against forensic evidence. Phone records, coffee cup timing, and eyewitness statements. Each inconsistency chipped away at his composure. Every blink, every shift in posture, every pause became a silent confession. After nearly an hour, the mask slipped. The suspect's shoulders sagged, eyes darting around the room. Okay, I didn't mean to, I didn't want to hurt her." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through the words. The carefully constructed calm had given way to fear and guilt. Martinez maintained his measured tone. "We know it was deliberate. We know it was planned. But you underestimated observation, how closely we watch, how thoroughly we analyze. Every choice, every gesture, every word speaks, and your behavior has told the truth." Finally, the suspect confessed. He described preparing the poisoned coffee, staging the apartment, and exploiting Emily's trust and routine. He admitted to anticipating investigators' assumptions and creating the perfect illusion of impossibility. Martinez reflected quietly afterward. The crime was solved not by brute force, but by observation, analysis, and understanding human behavior. The apartment, the warm coffee cup, the locked doors, each element had been part of a psychological duel. And in the end, the killer had underestimated the detective's ability to read the smallest signs of stress, deception, and intent. The courthouse loomed over the rain-slicked streets, a gray monument to justice. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation as families, lawyers, and media filled the gallery. Detective Martinez sat in the back, observing the proceedings, noting every micro-expression from the suspects and witnesses alike. The DA opened the case with deliberate pacing. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, voice steady, "this is not a crime of chance. Emily Johnson was murdered in her own apartment, locked from the inside, windows secured, no signs of struggle. The killer manipulated the scene to create an illusion of impossibility. Two coffee cups, one warm, one cold, reveal timing, intent, and premeditation. This was deliberate, calculated, and cold-blooded. The courtroom lights reflected off photographs of the apartment. The neatly arranged table, the two coffee cups, the empty chair where Emily had died. The jurors leaned forward, absorbing the details. Every visual reinforced the subtle psychological game the killer had played. Witnesses took the stand. Neighbors testified about seeing a hooded figure in the hallway. The roommate recounted the last hours, and the forensic team explained the poison timeline and coffee temperature. Each testimony layered detail upon detail, creating a full picture of meticulous planning. When the suspect took the stand, he appeared calm, composed, and articulate, a man rehearsed and confident. Yet subtle tells betrayed him. A flicker of tension around the jaw, a pause too long before certain answers, slight shifts in posture when questioned about timing. The DA highlighted inconsistencies, presenting forensic evidence alongside behavioral analysis, exposing cracks in his controlled facade. Expert testimony emphasized the psychological manipulation. The perpetrator understood the victim's routines, anticipated investigators' assumptions, and staged a scene of impossible circumstances. Confidence and calmness were tools, psychological weapons in the commission of this crime. Hours turned into days. The jury deliberated, weighing both physical evidence and subtle behavioral cues. Finally, the foreperson spoke. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of premeditated murder in the first degree." A hush fell over the courtroom. The suspect's carefully maintained composure faltered. A shadow of frustration and realization crossed his face. Martinez observed quietly, noting the subtle signs of defeat, the same tension he had seen unravel during the interrogation. Sentencing followed swiftly. The judge, stern but solemn, imposed the maximum term, citing the meticulous planning, psychological manipulation, and exploitation of trust as aggravating factors. "Justice," the judge said, "is not merely punishment. It is understanding the motives and ensuring protection for those who cannot defend themselves." Outside, rain began to dissipate, puddles reflecting the morning sun. Martinez stepped away from the courthouse, reflecting on the case. The locked apartment, the coffee cups, and the orchestrated scene had revealed more than a crime. They had revealed a mind, a psychology of control and manipulation that could not escape scrutiny. In the end, the crime was solved not just by evidence, but by understanding behavior, the silent, telling details that betray even the most calculated of minds. The courthouse emptied slowly, leaving only echoes of the trial. Detective Martinez lingered in the hallway, reflecting on the case. Justice had been served, but the memory of the apartment, the coffee cups, and the staged scene remained like shadows that refused to fade. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the meticulous crime that had unfolded behind locked doors. Emily's family stood quietly in the media throng, a mix of grief and relief etched on their faces. Their daughter had been taken too soon, but the painstaking work of investigators ensured that her death did not go unanswered. Martinez watched them, reminded that behind every piece of evidence, behind every forensic report, there were real lives forever altered. He thought back to the apartment. The two coffee cups, one warm, one cold, had been simple objects in everyday life, transformed into tools of control and deception. The locked doors, the untouched windows, the absence of struggle, all had been meticulously planned to manipulate perception. The killer had relied on routine, trust, and psychological expectation to execute the perfect crime. Martinez considered the investigation itself. Physical evidence was only part of the story. Microexpressions, subtle vocal inflections, small hesitations, these were the clues that revealed the truth when the scene alone could not. Observation of human behavior had broken the illusion of impossibility. Every tiny detail had contributed to building a psychological profile, narrowing the suspect pool, and ultimately securing a confession. The DA, reviewing the case one last time, remarked, "This case was more than a crime scene. It was a study in manipulation, perception, and human psychology. The apartment became an accomplice, a stage for deception, and yet careful observation saw through it." Martinez looked back at the photographs of the apartment one final time. The neat table, the two coffee cups, the locked doors, they were reminders of how ordinary spaces can conceal extraordinary danger. He knew the case would stay with him. The lesson was clear. In crimes like this, evidence is crucial, but understanding the human mind is what ultimately reveals the full truth. As the sun broke through dissipating clouds, Martinez walked away from the courthouse. Justice had been served. The killer had been held accountable. Yet the subtle psychological fingerprints left behind, the manipulation, the control, the reliance on routine, would linger in the minds of those who had uncovered the truth. In the end, the case reinforced an unshakable reality. Human behavior speaks louder than words, and even the most carefully constructed illusions can be exposed when attention is paid to the smallest, most telling details. The apartment was empty, but its story, the chilling lesson of trust, routine, and control, would remain.